Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
We're going to go into, thank you, we're going to go into the screen share. And we are going to actually discuss, as you will see, whether or not it's okay to engage in the occult. And you're going to see what it has to say about it. Quite specific. All right. So, Ki ata ba el haaretz, for you are coming into the land, asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha. And maybe here it means ki means when. It has more of a sense of when than because. But we'll see. Which the Lord your God is giving to you. Lo tilmad lasot, do not learn to practice ketoavot hagoyim hahem, like the disgusting behaviors of those nations. Do not. So I am translating to'eva as something disgusting. It is often translated as abomination, and at least my understanding of this word abomination is it's far more significant, let's say, than the word disgusting. That disgusting has a different sense to it, right? I think abomination is far more evil than, totally intolerable, whereas disgusting is just saying this, things that disgust us, if we sort of think about a little bit, sometimes those very things that disgust us actually fascinate us and sometimes become just the opposite. And I think that's what the concern is.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I have abhorrent, if you like that word better.
Yeah, no, you see, again,
You like disgusting better.
I like disgusting because
okay.
It has, I've given it some thought, right? And sort of, disgusting has a sort of pukey quality to it, whereas abhorrent means, sort of, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I want to run away from it or something where it's scary but I think this has more to do with its sort of pukey nature. Also the fact that I know that sometimes the very things that disgust us actually become objects of fascination. And in fact, sometimes, God forbid, we actually can become addicted to those things. They have an interesting effect on us psychologically. So, and of course, these people are practicing these things precisely because they're addicted to these things. They've become addicted to these things. So maybe I'm putting too much into this, but you'll have to be the judge. So, lo tilmad lasot, do not learn to practice, right? And in the Tractate Sanhedrin, page 68, aval ata lamed, but you should. So it says, do not learn to practice. And that they're looking at that very legalistically, right? Do not learn to practice, but you should learn to understand and to teach, to instruct, explaining what it means. Klomar, that is to say, lahavin ma'asehem, to understand the nature of what they're doing, to understand their practices, kama he makul kalim, that is to say, the degree to which they are ruinous, they're awful, they're off base. Makul kal means it's ruined, ruinous, something like that. Ulohorot, what about teaching? And to instruct levanecha, your children, lo ta'aseh kach v'chach, don't do this stuff. In other words, interesting that it's not saying to ignore it, right? It's not to say to pretend like it isn't around. It's not saying to abhor it in the sense of running away from it. But people need to understand the nature of how these things are ruinous. Shezehu chok ha'ovdei ha'kochavim. This is the chok we know we've translated as sort of law but I think it's sort of more than that, right? But the practice of the idolatrous practices. So interesting. What occurs to me about this is because we are dealing now with emotional appetites. And clearly these people have an appetite to practice some of the things that are going to be mentioned in just a moment. And again, I think one of the fundamental purposes of religion, and not necessarily just Judaism, but certainly very important within Judaism, is in fact being able to control your appetite, right? In other words, to control your impulses. And the fact, and this is something that's even all the way back into Genesis, is that even though our impulses and our appetites have a huge emotional, psychological control over us, the Torah and Judaism assumes that we are capable of controlling them. It may be a struggle. In fact, generally it is a struggle, but that we are able to take that rational side of us, which is reflected by saying, you need to understand these things. You need to know about them. You have to understand how, in fact, they can ruin people's lives. So it's not that you should ignore these things. You need to know, and by knowing how awful these things are, you have the possibility of avoiding them. And I think there's so much locked into this sentence here as to what the assumptions are. And of course, it's a powerful message even today. And I think today we struggle with these particular issues. I think they are very, very human. So we'll go on. But please, I obviously welcome any comments and thoughts regarding this. So, being more specific, lo yimatzeh becha, you should not find amongst you, they should not be found amongst you, ma'avir beno uvito ba'esh, one who causes his son or daughter to pass through the fire. Rashi is going to explain exactly what we're talking about, whether or not he is going to take it literally, whether or not this might be metaphoric. I don't know. It's possible. Kosem ksamim, one who casts spells, at least that's my understanding of the Hebrew. In fact, in modern Hebrew, when you say someone is sort of, how can I put it? Like they have sort of such an amazing beauty, or that they're, excuse me, sorry, that they use maksim. It's based on this word, right? Spellbinding. Me'onein, was going to see the commentary on that. Menachesh, all these words. Umechashev. Kshafim, it has to do, well, again, I'll just say, the commentary is going to explain the meaning of these words. So let's keep going. And it goes on, by the way. The next verse also continues with these things. Right. Ma'avir beno uvito ba'esh. One who causes his son or daughter to pass through the fire. As I said, Rashi has a very literal interpretation of this, of course, based on what he's read in the Gemara. So excuse me, I'm going to take care of that. Let's do that. One, Havot HaMolech, it is the kind of service that a practice in terms of worshiping this god called Molech. That's the name of this god. Oseh Medurot, he makes bonfires. Eish, Medurot Eish, bonfires. Mikan on one side and the other side. Uma'aviro bein shtehem, and he causes the child to walk between the two of them. And again, no more commentary here about that and what its significance is, but apparently it's, again, some kind of probably symbolic way of showing faith and trust and something like that. I don't know. Very often it could have sort of a sacrificial suggestion to it. So, to this god Moloch. Kosem ksamim, ezehu kosem. So what do we mean by a kosem? Ha'ochez et makalo. This is one who holds onto his stick, the omer, and using that stick as a means to make decisions. The omer im elech, im lo elech. In other words, he's using it as a divining rod of some kind. And he says, should I go? Should I not go? Based on how the stick reacts, or at least how he believes the stick is reacting. V'chein hu omer, and Rashi provides us with a scriptural support of this interpretation in Hosea chapter 4. Ami be'etzo yish'al, my people consults its stick, the stick, umakalo yagidlo, and his staff informs him. So again, instead of appealing to God using these kinds of occult methods to inform oneself. So you can see that the Torah is speaking against, I guess we call it occultism. Going on, a me'onen. What's a me'onen? This is again in Sanhedrin, Tractate Sanhedrin, page 65. Rabbi Akiva Omer, that's the abbreviation here. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says, Elu no unot. So you can see me'onen. He's trying to wrestle with this word me'onen. Unot means times. She'omrim una plonit yafeh. In other words, who says this is a good time, right? This specific time is a good time lehatchil, to start some kind of activity, right? So in other words, sort of foretelling what are the right times to do things and have success. The chachamim omrim, but the sages say, Elu ochzei ha'inayim. This is talking about people who perform ochzei ha'inayim, literally means hold the eyes. I believe by this they mean someone who does sleight of hand, something like that. But I don't know that it's against, how can I say it, entertaining magicians. I don't think it's talking about that. It's talking about someone who's using delusional, practices that fool people on a more significant level, to try and influence their behavior in a far more significant level, and not simply for entertainment purposes. But again, this all begs interpretation, but it's that kind of practice. Menachesh, and this is from the Sifri, that commentary, early Midrashic commentary on Numbers and Deuteronomy. Pito nafla, the bread mipiv, his bread fell from his mouth. Tzvi hifsiko baderech, a deer interrupts his journey. Makalo nofel miyado, his stick falls from his hand, and he takes that as a sign. That's, in other words, he understands that as being a menachesh. Menachesh is to look for signs like these and say, oh, this is a sign that we need to do something or not to do something. Again, any kind of, you might say, superstitious practice. Interesting. Very unique to Deuteronomy, by the way. There's nothing like this, I don't believe. There are statements elsewhere, I believe, that talk about copying the practices, obviously idolatry, but here where it's talking about this kind of occult practice. The chover chever, this is a charmer, as you'll see. The shofuel ov yudoni, this is one who consults necromancy, really, consulting the dead. V'doresh el hamitim. This is specific. One who inquires of the dead. And we'll see. Rashi's going to explain what each little section actually refers to. Chover chever. Sanhedrin again in this place on page 65. Shemitzaref nechashim. He gathers together snakes or akravim or scorpions or sha'ar chayot or other animals lemakom echad into one place. Now, exactly what this means is a little bit puzzling, right? But it sounds to me like essentially he's talking about snake charming, that kind of practice, I believe, right? She'ol ov, okay, so he says, ze machshefut, and that refers to sorcery, right? Sheshmor, okay, or it has to do with some kind of, I don't know, I don't want to call it an idol, but Shmor Pitom, the name of this okay, the spirit, right? His name is Pitom, Umedaber Mishichyo, and this person speaks, this medium speaks Mishichyo from his armpit, Uma'ale et hamet, and he raises up the image of a dead person, Bevet Hashchi, within his armpit. Interesting, right? Shalo, his armpit. Yidoni, machnis etzim chaya sheshma yadua. He puts a bone of an animal whose name is a yadua, unless it means its name is known, but I think generally it's translated as that its name is literally yadua, letoch piv. And by the way, this is where you get yidoni, right? A yidon, a yadua person. In letoch piv, into his mouth, umedaber ha'etzem, and this bone speaks al yedei machshafut, machshavot, and this bone speaks through sorcery, right? So the doresh el hametim, and one who consults the dead. Agon, for example, hama'aleh bezichruto, one who raises up through his genitals, v'hanish'al begilgulot, or one who consults a skull, something like that. So this is sort of eye-opening or eye-popping kind of stuff that we're reading about here. But again, all these kinds of practices that have some kind of, may I say, disgusting, is that using a too harsh a word? These kind of practices that are bizarre, right? Bizarre. Let's end this up here. Let's go on. Ki avat Hashem kol oseh, saying this is considered a disgusting behavior before God. Anyone who practices these things. Uviglal hatoevot ha'ele, and on account of these disgusting practices, Hashem Elokecha morish otam mipanecha, the Lord your God is disinheriting them from before you, that you're able to take over their land. This is the reason. These are reasons given as to why they were not worthy of holding on to the territory that they had. So it says, kol oseh ele, which means, anyone who practices these things. And in the tractate Makot Kafdalad 24, and in the Sifra, it says, oseh kol ele lo nemar. So notice it's saying, it doesn't say oseh kol ele, right? It says kol oso ele. So it's just being very clear why. Ela kol osa ele afilu achat mehem, even one of them. In other words, it doesn't say one who practices all these things, which might imply that if you do all these things, you're going to be violating the law. But it's saying anyone who does any one of these things, anyone who does these things. And so it's Rashi is saying it's being very clear that any one of these kind of practices is considered a to'eva. It's a disgusting behavior. Onwards, last little win for here. Tamim tiye im Hashem Elokecha. So now it's going to the opposite side, and it's saying it's not just telling you what you shouldn't do, it's telling you or how you shouldn't behave. It's also telling you now how you should behave. Tamim basically means wholehearted or perfect. You should be im Hashem Elokecha, with the Lord your God. You should act in a straightforward, way. Here we go. Tamim tiye Hashem Elokecha. Wholehearted. You should be with the Lord your God. Hitalech imo betmimut. Walk with him in simplicity, right? V'titzpeh lo, and hope, look forward to him, put your trust in him. V'lo tachkor achar ha'atidot. Don't delve too deeply into future times. Ela kol ma she'yavo alecha, but anything that happens to you, whatever happens to you, kabel betmimut, accept it in a wholehearted way. Don't try to look too deeply into the kinds of ways in which were mentioned in the previous sentences. And then you will be his people, okay? And his portion. So basically saying that our religion isn't into the occult. It is into trying to accept what happens to us in a wholehearted kind of way. And with this, we will stop today. Mark the place. Willing, we will continue tomorrow. And I'm going to stop the share. Okay. Any thoughts, comments before I stop the recording? Okay. Nothing for the record.